Well, that's different. I don't know what I just did. Hey, what are you doing? I don't know what I just did, but I just turned the camera on with the hand movement. I didn't know I had it set up to do that, guys. Anyways, alright, that was a little startling. We'll go ahead and get started then. It's fine. The universe wanted me to start, apparently. And then you get to see my cat's butt. You're welcome. Alright, so, hey. Welcome to Thursday's episode of Where All the Ladies At? A podcast where apparently my magical, mystical podcast is getting involved because it's getting everything turned on. I'm sure I don't know how it happened. Anyways, I'm a little startled. I'm a little flabbergasted, but that's fine. This is Where All the Ladies At. It is a podcast where I, your friendly neighborhood history nerd, Kim, take a deep dive into history and really try to figure out where all the women went. This is Thursday, so that means I'm talking about historical figures. If you want more mystical, magical stuff, go check out my Monday where I cover women in myth and legend. And this month I am covering sun goddesses, which is very, very cool. And on Thursday's episode, I'm covering women philosophers and women that stood up to fascism. And sometimes they're the same person. So, last week I covered Simone de Beauvoir, so please go back and check her out because she is absolutely one of my most favorite philosophers. And don't come at me, I know there's some people out there that there is some very controversial things that happen in her life, but in general, her thought process on gender and the second sex is key and pivotal to feminism. Today, we're talking about Hannah Arendt. And if you haven't heard about her, don't worry, we're going to talk all about her. You'll see why I chose her, how she shapes how we think about politics and power and the human condition. But as always, before we do that, we're going to do some housekeeping and some shameless plugging. And then we're going to talk about what the world was like that little Hannah grew up in and lived in. And so let's start with housekeeping. If you want to reach out to me, there are ways to do that in the description box. There is also links there to help support financially the podcast, which I would appreciate. I'd love to be able to do more and more. This is where my heart lies. I love teaching people and I love learning things. And I love learning things and sharing it. It's my passion in life. And in everything I do, it's what I do. I'm a writer, I'm a teacher, I am a life coach. Everything I do is about learning and sharing. So I'd love to be able to do that more. So if you have a few bits of cash and can kick it my way, that's cool. But I understand right now you may not because prices are high, and we all like a good fried egg in the morning, right? That's aimed at you, my friends in America. So, anyways, let's not get too political, and yet we are going to get political, because of that. Anyways, so if you want to support the podcast, if you can't financially, please simply just rate, review, share, follow, comment. Please, let's have as much engagement with this as possible, both on Spotify as well as on YouTube. So I just highly appreciate it. The more you guys do all those things, the more the algorithm pushes me out, and the more chance it is for us to have a really great community of people that like to share cool things about badass women. Yeah? So please do that. If you want more, there is also a Medium publication that goes along with this where I talk more in depth about the people I talk about, as well as a bunch of other stuff. There is also a link to my other podcast, which is called Our Mystic Road Trip. So if you like magical, mystical, spiritual, woo-woo kind of stuff, head over there. It's a great and fun time. I do 2 episodes over there as well. One based in more spiritual, magical wellness, and then one about tarot. So if you're into that, check it out. That is my shameless plugging and my housekeeping. Now let's dive into what it was like for women in the time of Hannah Arendt. and what was going on in the world. Let's start with the world. So first thing you have to know is Hannah was born, I want to make sure I give you the right city. Hannah was born in Hanover. And Hanover, right, but she settled in Königsberg, which was in East Prussia. So when I'm talking about what's happening in the world, I want to be talking about what happens in Prussia, and which would later be, most of Prussia would later become Germany. Some of it would become other countries. And what it was happening in the world at the time. So let's start. It's the early 1900s, and Germany is under the German Empire, or what we would like to call, those of us that have German ancestry, the Prussian Empire. As a caveat, guys, a good chunk of my family is from Germany, and it is from northern Germany. It is Prussian. And so the Prussian Empire, it's complicated, right? At this time of the thing, it's the 1900s, right? Early 1900s. There's a lot of tension. The country is kind of, you figure early 1900s covers the World War I, right? So the country itself is still recovering from the aftermath of World War I, right? And this had a huge impact on the people and the political landscape of this region. The Treaty of Versailles, which was signed in 1919, was necessary, but it was also looked at in some ways as the way the world punished Germany for starting the war. And not that wasn't wrong, that wasn't right to have some consequences, but what happened was they signed the treaty, but they weren't happy about it, right? There was huge reparations, and this caused economic struggles, and it was basically in this region, in Germany, in the Prussian Empire, it really, a lot of Germans had a lot of national humiliation, right? And that's when you get the feeling that the whole place was basically, it always felt like it was kind of on a powder keg, right? Because, it got so bad there. In Prussia itself, and this is now, as I said, part of modern day Germany, things were even more tense, right? People were kind of struggling with political and economic issues, just like the rest of Germany. And a new system was rising, the Weimar Republic. Now, this was established in 1999, and it was after the Germans' defeat in World War I. And it was supposed to be this new democratic order. It was supposed to be a fresh start, right? But, as you well know, it didn't turn out that way. It was not very stable. There were political factions everywhere. Some people wanted change. Others wanted more of the traditional route. The tensions were starting to grow, and it started to create this really volatile environment. And that environment would start to fuel these very extreme ideas and extreme political groups. And one of those political groups just so happened to be the Nazi Party. And they kind of made their presence known in the 1930s, right? And this is when the rise of the mustachioed horror creature, Adolf Hitler, and the rest of his followers kind of took Germany. And then later, of course, it really developed into taking more of Europe, and it went down a very dark path, and it led to a lot of atrocities, and it led to World War II and the Holocaust. This period, it was a period when ideals of democracy and freedom were kind of challenged by an ideology that sought total control over the people, and it led to some pretty horrific events in human history. What I want to say is that, and I think I mentioned it in another one of my podcasts, there is this tarot reader I follow, and she's amazing. Her name's Sarah Martucci. If you're into tarot, and you just kind of like more of a really authentic person, check her out. She says something that really, it's like the best thing, right? And that is we had an open book test and we failed, and we're failing. We haven't failed yet, but we are failing. And this is why I chose these people for Women's History Month, is because there is so much information from history, and we seem to be just forgetting it or ignoring it. It's frightening, because everything I just described that led to these horrible events is happening today. And as much as I'm an American, and I am kind of focused on America, because that's where my family is, it's not happening only in America. It's happening in a lot of different places. It's happening in both the places I call home. Okay? So I think we have to pay attention. And this is why, once again, I chose these ladies. Hannah Arendt's story starts to really take form because she lived in these turbulent times. And her experience of escaping Nazi Germany had a huge impact on what she thought philosophically and her political thinking ideas. But in order to really get that, we have to look at not only what was happening in the world, but what was happening for women, because she was a woman. And so they experienced different things at that time, right? So what was it like in that area of the world at this time? So during the early 1900s in Germany and Prussia, women had been granted the right to vote in 1918, just after World War I ended. And this was a big shift, right? It marked really a beginning of a lot of great political rights for women. However, even though they had that right, the role in society was still kind of defined by traditional views, right? And this was the way it was across the globe in most countries. I won't say all, because honestly, I don't know about all of them. But for the most part, this was kind of the way it was, right? Women are expected to focus at home and the family, raising children, the private sphere, right? The public life, the intellectual circles, the positions of power, that was a men's world at this time. By the time the Weimar Republic was really established, hold on a second, I have a feeling I'm going to need a lot of this. Because I'm going to get riled up, I think. By the time the Weimar Republic was established in 1990, whoa, women had gained more rights than ever before. But the real struggle was in the way they were still viewed, right? Many women, especially middle class and upper class, began to work outside the house, right? And started into professions. But of course, they were relegated to certain professions, right? Teaching, nursing, secretarial work. This all sounds very familiar, right? However, it wasn't uncommon for women to face discrimination even in those workplaces. And higher education was still pretty much predominantly a male thing. But there were some women, sorry guys, that rose above those societal expectations. And the world of intellectual thought was slowly beginning to open up to women, right? But there was still resistance, of course, and Arendt was one of those women, right? Along with Simone de Beauvoir and everything, right? She really kind of defied the role of women in society, and she engaged in high-level academic pursuits. She challenged political norms. Her story is she was very courageous, very resilient. She didn't allow the turbulence of the era and what was going on to dictate her destiny. I will get into a little bit of why, but she was a Jewish woman in Nazi Germany. And that added, sorry guys. That added, all right, I took a break. I think I'm okay now. The fact she was a Jewish woman in Nazi Germany added more to that problem, right? She wasn't really religious, but the rise of Adolf Hitler and Nazis meant that every person, whether they were religious or not, that had the Jewish heritage was at risk. Discriminations, the laws that stripped Jews of their rights, and the looming threat of violence made it really impossible for Arendt to stay in Germany, right? So when Hitler took place, she fled. She went to France, right? To get outside of the dangers. But other women in Germany, their lives were pretty affected by the rise of the Nazi party. Women were encouraged to embrace traditional roles again. The Nazis promoted an idea of Kinderkirche, which basically means children, kitchen, church. Women were expected to be mothers, homemakers, and they served the family unit above all else. Female professionals or women who defied those expectations were kind of seen as a threat to the state of ideals, right? So of course there were women that resisted, women who fought against Nazi policies in small and large ways, but they found themselves caught between their own desire for like personal freedom and the overwhelming pressure of an authoritarian regime that sought to really limit their rights and freedoms. And this was a time of struggle for a lot of them, a time when women were being forced to choose between conformity or defiance. And that's the world that Hannah was kind of growing up in, right? And no matter, despite the overwhelming odds of women in the early 20th century in Germany, Hannah Arendt and people like her made a lasting impact, right? Her intellect was groundbreaking. She tackled complex political ideas. She didn't shy away from controversial topics, especially those surrounding like totalitarian. I can always have that problem. Oh, all right. I think I am good again. I swear. That word always gets me, guys. Totalitarian regimes. Ooh, that's a word. And evil and the role of individuals in large. Her writings were instrumental in understanding the factors that led to the rise of totalitarian regimes like Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. So here's what I would say. And that being said, maybe now is the time to pull out that book or find the book and keep it, because I have a feeling in some places this book might wind up banned. So if you have a copy of the Origins of Totalitarianism, keep it. Read it, share the knowledge, because I think it could be helpful for a lot of people. Her work is critical in political theory. Her ability to analyze political power really has been essential to a lot of influential thinkers, right? So let's, before we get to know all this more stuff, right? We've talked a little bit about her already. Let's get to know her, right? Let's start from baby Hannah and move to the badass Hannah. How about that, right? So, Hannah Arendt, of course, was born in early 1900s, right? 1906, she was born in Hanover, Germany. Her environment was constantly in flux, right? Her family was Jewish. So eventually they moved around. They settled in Königsberg, which was in East Prussia. It's now a part of Russia. And even as a kid, though, she witnessed a lot of volatile political and social climate. The Jewish community in Germany, though very significant, found itself increasingly vulnerable, right? Anti-Semitism was on the rise, especially when it got to the 1930s. And although Arendt's upbringing was secular, her family was not super religious. The outside pressure of being Jewish at this time was it would have a huge impact on her life, right? So she had this natural intellectual capability. She had deep curiosity, even from an early age. She had this passion for philosophy, and so she went to university. She went to the University of Marburg, and this was one of the big academic institutions of the time, right? It was here that she encountered Martin Heidegger. Now, Heidegger is a philosopher whose ideas would influence her deeply, but kind of with a little controversy, right? Heidegger was this really big, well-known intellectual figure, but he was involved in the Nazi Party. And Hannah would later, of no surprise, really criticize that in her writings, right? Their relationship was, there was an admiration, but there was also tension, right? Because their intellectual exchanges became more and more complex as the period became more and more tumultuous, right? Her academic life, though, was cut short. 1933 happened, Hitler began to rise, the Nazi regime, and she was a Jewish woman, and her position in Germany became pretty much dirt. So like many other intellectuals of the time that were at odds with the Nazi ideology, Arendt had to leave. She had no choice for her own life, right? So in 1933, she left Germany. She went to France. She continued her studies and writings there, and she really struggled with the political changes she had started to see firsthand. But of course, she went to France, right? So the escape that was not the end of her troubles, right? Europe was in the midst of a massive upheaval, and soon after, war loomed, right? Arendt's intellectual pursuits shifted, and she sought refuge from the world being torn apart, right? She didn't, totalitarianism and violence go hand in hand. That's just the way it is. While she was in France, she really deepened her understanding of the rise of that totalitarian regimes, and it was this environment that her critical thinking and political writings began to shape, right? By 1941, the situation in Europe had become dangerous, even more so than it was before, and a lot of intellectuals, including Arendt, fled the Nazis, and they went to the United States. She arrived in the U.S. at a time when political climate was equally charged, not as extreme as the rest of the world, but it definitely was a time where things were kind of in the U.S. as well. But this really began the new chapter of her life, right? She was really transitioning from refugee seeking safety to a prolific political theorist whose work later would change the course of political thought, right? So let's talk about that philosophy. Let's talk a little bit about that word, right? Hannah Arendt's contributions were groundbreaking, right? And continue to influence contemporary thought to this very day. Her work pretty much focused on nature of power, authority, totalitarianism, and the human condition. And it often kind of looked deeper into the political structures that kind of shape society and behaviors that individuals within them have and those behaviors that are shaped because of that, right? And of course, Hannah's ideas were shaped by her own experiences as a Jewish woman fleeing Nazi Germany, right? This is a very unique perspective on on the world. And I think that's kind of what might set her apart from a lot of her contemporaries, right? One of her most well-known works is the one I told you to go out and buy, which is Origins of Totalitarianism. It was published in 1951, and yet, I just want to pause for a second. It was published in 1951, and yet here in 2025, I think it still pertains, and I think it's still impactful. In it, she kind of analyzes the roots of totalitarian movements. She examines the rise of Nazi Germany, but also looks at Stalinism in the Soviet Union, which was another rise. And her key argument in this was that these regimes emerge when societies are characterized by social isolation. And it's a breakdown of traditional structures and a growing sense of fear, right? She explored how totalitarian leaders manipulate the masses and create systems where individual freedoms are annihilated. I'm just going to look at the camera for a second, give a pause, and let everybody think about that. Yeah? All right. Her insights were kind of revolutionary at the time, and definitely offered a framework for understanding how governments could rise to power, thrive, but, and here's where the hope comes in for everything that's happening now, eventually they collapse. And there's another book she did, which I highly suggest as well. It's called The Human Condition. It was published in 1958, and this is where she examined the active life, or vida activa, as she called it. And she divided these into three fundamental activities: labor, work, and action. And she argues that modern society's focus on labor and the pursuit of material wealth had led to a loss of political engagement and a meaningful action in public life. She was really concerned about the erosion of the public sphere, where individuals could come together to engage in politics and debate and collective decision making. For her, true freedom and fulfillment came through action, the ability to speak, to be able to act, and participate in the world with others. You know, she really, in this work, The Human Condition, she really focused about the banality of evil. And she would later expand upon this in her report on the trial, of Adolf Eichmann, who was a Nazi officer responsible for organizing the logistics of the Holocaust. She coined the term to describe how ordinary individuals could commit heinous acts by simply following orders without engaging in critical thought or understanding the consequences of their action. I wanted to read that word for word because there are people in power, and right now I'm talking directly to the US, that are going along with things that fit this description. Horrible things. Following orders, doing what they're supposed to do, right? And not questioning the consequences of their actions. Because it doesn't matter if you're following the orders, if you do the deed, you're still part of the problem. It's that simple. Her reflections on this trial, Eichmann's trial, she published under Eichmann in Jerusalem. It's called Eichmann in Jerusalem, A Report on the Banality of Evil. And this was in 1963. And it caused a pretty big stir. She argued that Eichmann was not a fanatic or a sociopath, but rather an ordinary bureaucrat who, in his blind obedience to authority, participated in one of history's greatest atrocities. Now, do I agree with her fully? No. But I do agree with the idea that saying people do horrible things because they think they're supposed to, right? And that's probably going to stir up a little controversy, and that's fine, and I'm not saying Eichmann was sane, by no means. Please do not put that in my mouth, because he was not. And like I said, I don't agree with this. He was a fanatic. But the thought process is correct. There are people, normal people that maybe, I'm not going to throw names out there, but there are some politicians in the U.S., and I'm talking about the U.S. because this is who I know the most, that I may not have agreed with their politics, but I respected them, and they were sane people until Trump. And all of a sudden, these sane people, or maybe they were hiding it, I don't know, but just on the outside, what I knew, they seemed like sane, logical people. They may not have had the same beliefs and opinions as me, but they were sane and they were respectful, and and suddenly these people, these politicians, and people I know, all of a sudden became. So I think she was partially right with her thought process. Once again, let me repeat, I do not think Eichmann was an innocent bureaucrat, and he definitely did not have blind obedience. A fanatic, I would say, but the idea is correct in some aspects. She didn't really shy away from uncomfortable truths. She dissected the nature of evil, totalitarianism, and the complexities of human behavior with a lot of rigor, right? In her later works, like On Revolution or The Life of the Mind, she explored even ideas of freedom and revolution and the relationship between thought and action, all while kind of trying to grapple with the legacies of totalitarianism and war. Throughout her career, hold on. Sorry, guys. Throughout her career, she really focused not just on political theory, but on the fundamental questions of what it meant to be a human in a world that is so often fraught with conflict and suffering. Her philosophical inquiries, really, she wanted to understand relationship between power, authority, and the individual, right? So her writings still continue to inspire people in the fields of political theory and philosophy and history. Her theories and ideas shape how we think about politics and authority and those things, right? Her work was far from just merely academic, right? She is very relevant in the world today. Her analysis on totalitarianism and all that, it's given us a critical tool to examine how governments form, how they exert control, how individuals interact with these systems, especially in times of crisis. This is why I chose her, because her examination of totalitarian regimes has had a lasting influence on political thought. These insights help us understand not just the rise of Nazi Germany or Stalinist Russia, but can help us see the warning signs of authoritarianism in the modern world. She really wanted all of us to be vigilant, to question how power is distributed, and to examine whether our own political systems are creating this culture of isolation or promoting collective engagement, right? Public action and political engagement for her were key. In her view, democracy was not something to be passively consumed, but active, collective. She called on individuals to take part in public life, to engage with one another in meaningful ways, to exercise your rights and responsibilities in society. This was revolutionary to her. She said political freedom was not merely the absence of oppression, but it was the active participation in shaping the world around us. The world may seem like it's beyond our control right now, but Hannah believed you could still make a meaningful difference, even if things seem to be out of control. She also made it clear that we are all part of a larger social and political fabric. It is our collective responsibility to ensure that the structures of society reflects the needs, rights, and the freedoms of all people. All people. This was really important for women because Arendt historically believed that we were excluded from the political realm. Her work brought attention to the need for equal participation in public life, and she urged women to assert their voice in a world where political engagement was often dominated by men. So she wanted everyone to be involved, regardless of gender or background. She really put a spotlight on the importance of inclusive political systems that recognize and respect the contributions of all individuals. Her philosophy transcends just philosophy. It's a reminder we should not be bystanders in political processes. We all play a part in shaping the way our society is going to go. And it's up to each of us to ensure that we do so with thoughtfulness, responsibility, and commitment to justice. And not just for us or people that look like us or people that love like us or people that worship like us. It is there for all of us. And that's kind of what she stood for. She was a giant, man. There's no other way to say it. She lived through 2 wars, the rise of totalitarian regimes, world that was changing politically, and she still carved out space for herself. She's a great influence, and if I have inspired you guys to check out her writing, that would be amazing, because I think right now we should really all look into it, right? If you're thinking how power works, how societies can go terribly wrong. Societies can go terribly wrong. She was the first person who said, hey, we need to really look into that. We need to figure this out, because if we don't, bad things are going to continue to happen. People are going to continue to lose their rights. People are going to continue to lose their lives. People are going to continue to lose their freedoms. That's not what this world should be about. So I got a little heated. I warned you guys. And because I did, I think I might have talked kind of fast. She's an amazing, amazing philosopher. Please check out her work. I do think it's much like Simone de Beauvoir last week. I do think their works are still very relevant today, and especially in this time in history. Check them out. And if you do, let me know what you think. And if you want to have a good conversation, make sure you reach out to me. You can do that through my social media, or you can comment on the video, or we can, you can slide into my DMs, whatever. It doesn't matter to me. Or if you like old school, there is an email as well. Check it out. If you want to support the podcast, you like this rant, you like this passion, you can do it a couple different ways. You could just like, review, share, comment, do all that kind of good stuff. Please, gets me out there in the algorithm. And if you want to kick a few bucks my way, that would be amazing too. You can do that through my Patreon or my Buy Me a Coffee. If you want more about Hannah or anybody else I talk about, make sure you check out the Medium publication. And if you're into the magical, mystical, spiritual stuff, which I think right now we all could use a little extra wellness and spirituality, make sure you check out my other podcast called Our Mystic Road Trip. And that is it this week, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you got inspired. And I hope you guys stay curious, stay blessed, and stay safe.